Chile here with Sirius Taurus Moon, and we are continuing in our series of episodes with Venuranus. Hi. Astrosec is in delay. Okay, now we got Venuranus in the 8th house. And this is Sol Hour Jupiter Day. Rubbing my hands. Nice energy for this one. How old is your old money? Here's what prompted me to press record. Shout out to Albina from Privileged View. And this is Albina interviewing. Albina is new money, interviewing a lady that has been coming from a lineage that is old money since 1904. Now, this is why JP Morgan, although he's still affiliated with Epstein, said millionaires don't work with astrology. Billionaires do. Because the sextile between Pluto and Neptune has been going on for a century. Another thing that has been going on for a century and will not go for another century is Aries in Aries. And this is where I'm going to stop and ask you, how old is your old money? Because when we are talking about intergenerational wealth, we're talking about intergenerational planets. And a lot of reasons that people talking about this age and compare that to the Gilded Age. So if we take a look at the Gilded Age, not new. Okay, welcome to the second Gilded Age, but astrologically speaking, why do they talk about the Gilded Age? And this is the 1880s. And this is where I disagree with people talk about the Gilded Age on several things. Again, I'm going to have to look at the 1880s, and it's definitely going to have a sequel. But the one thing that we didn't think about is the fact that the 1880s were building to the not to the bisextile, building to the sextile between Pluto and Neptune. Let's take a look, and this is using the power of AstroSeek. And this is the lovely thing about the spirit of the times. I'm definitely privileged in the sense that I can read English. I'm definitely privileged in the sense that I have a cell phone. From that vantage point, if one knows English and has a cell phone, thanks to AstroSeek, I'm able to do what in the past only people that could do high levels of computations were able to do, and this is look at astrology. And thanks to the many astrologers, some of them may have been entangled with Epstein-like cults because in their time, there wasn't a way to basically not be a slave without committing crimes against humanity. And perhaps this series of episodes will assist us to untangle the point of interferences that will not perpetuate crimes against humanity, but will also not demonize the people coming out of the times where there wasn't a possibility to be a free man or free woman without raping, trafficking, being involved in genocides, and so on and so forth. Now, let's talk about this lovely tool that has to do with the ephemeris table, and we look at aspect search engine. Neptune Pluto. Neptune. And we're going to take a look at any major aspect, and we're going to build it since 1800, or you know what, since 1800s is okay. And this table is not going to be too big. 1816 we had Neptune squaring Pluto, and this is the aspect that we are looking at. 1816 to 1844 to the late 1820s. Now, Neptune moves even slower than Pluto, I believe. Let me check myself here. 444. Synchronicity of numbers, okay? $165. Then Pluto is, although people talk about the trans-Neptunians, Pluto is 248-year cycle. So the reason I'm looking at this, because it's going to tell me if it's a closing or an opening cycle. Thanks, Michael O'Brien, that taught me that when we look at the faster planet applying to the slower moving planet. And this also tells us if an aspect is applying or separating. If an aspect is applying, then basically we have a stronger effect of that aspect. If an aspect is separating, then this is where we are in the aftershocks, in the aftermath. And this was the closing square between Pluto and Neptune. And right now we are moving from the sextile. We're going to have a little more years in the sextile. And towards the 2060s, we're moving towards the opening square between Neptune and Pluto. So the closing square was in 1820. The closing sextile was in 1844. 1891 was the conjunction, and this was the Gilded Age. 1950s, we entered the opening sextile. Now, to be fair and square, the application to the opening sextile is since the 1800s. Basically, the beginning of the 20th century. But only in the 1950s will we see the exact sextile. The conjunction was the Gilded Age, but we are not moving towards a conjunction. Which means that the Neptune-Pluto conjunction that was the characteristic of the Gilded Age is not going to be there. So we already have two outer planets that were in Gemini. By the way, Adolf Hitler was born at the Gilded Age. But so was Marlene Dietrich. We already have two intergenerational planets that we are supposed to see involved with the Gilded Age, creating a different yoga, a different aspect, moving from the sextile to the square. Now, does that mean we're not going to have trends that are somewhat like trends that were at the Gilded Age? Absolutely not. We are talking about Neptune and Pluto. And here is the drama. Neptune and Pluto are still sextiling. They are opening to the square. So what we're expected to see is if the Gilded Age was the conjunction, we need to look at the 1820s and the 1844 to further identify the trends. In fact, this is probably going to have a sequel as far back as the 1700s. Let's take a look, for example, at the 1770s. So we had the trine in the 1700s. And also we have an unprecedented transit, which is Sedna in Gemini. 12 millennia we did not have Sedna in Gemini, so do not expect it to be like the Gilded Ages. But for us to make a prediction, we need to see a little far back. For example, the foundation of United States was within the trine, where Pluto was in Aquarius already, but here Pluto was in Capricorn. And Neptune was in Virgo, later moving to Libra. Look at how long did the trine last. 1860s, we're entering the square. And this would be the closing square, I believe. Which tells us that to go through an entire synodic cycle, we need to go even far back. But if we go that far back, let's see when did the trine begin. And we are already entering Vogue times. The Vogue, Dutch East India, is said to have inspired the United States. It was the first traded company. It was the first company that worked with speculative investments through the age of expeditions. And we have Vogue times would be around the sextile here, I believe. Either that or the square. Let's take a look at Vogue that inspired United States. (1602). So we are talking already within the square, I believe. Let's see. No. Within the trine, we have Vogue. Oh, and this Vogue was the release from the trine. 1644 would be the opposition. Until 1704, we entered the trine that will already be the foundation of United States. So Vogue started within the previous trine, and Vogue would probably be the opening trine, but the closing trine with the foundation of United States. Now, according to some theories, we have living people that have memories from that time. So, by the way, we see this. Yes, so this would be the opening trine. This particular 1598 particularly was quite associated probably with mass murder, but I don't know if people died from famine or something like that. Anyway, Ireland something, I don't know when was. Anyway, so Vogue started at the end of the trine, the beginning of the separation from the trine, that would be 1602. Then we have the opposition, and then the closing trine would lead us to the foundation of United States, but it started as the British company, probably the British East India. As the expeditions, wait a second. The 1600s till 1874. That's the thing. They thought they were sailing to India, and they found Indian people. Indian people. When the West is writing its own history, and the whole world is like, "What's that? What's the undecipherable writings of the West?" So the Independence War would be associated with the discovery of the planet Uranus. In 1776, we are heading within the closing trine to the Independence War of United States. Now that talks about Gilded Age. Gilded Age would be the conjunction. So 1800s, we have the square, and then we're going into the 1844 is the sextile. The Gilded Age, the 1880s. So it is basically building up to the conjunction. We are not building up to the conjunction right now. We are actually the opening sextile. We're building up to the opening square. Now let's go and see where was the opening square, because the opening square would be before Vogue. Now we haven't put Aries in the equation just yet. Now why am I saying how old is your old money? The Gilded Age was definitely an era where we shifted into another Pluto Neptune aspect. And this is where the people that talk about the Gilded Age as a megalithic transition of wealth are correct. There is a megalithic transition of wealth and wealth structures. But this is where the nature of this transaction is different. This is why people like Albino, people that are new money, or people that are coming onto wealth, need to sort the wheat from the chaff with the advices they are receiving from old money. Some of that might even tell me, Shirley, we have this is why we are new money. Because old money doesn't know how to make new money. It knows it has to. No, let's put it in perspective. It knows how to generate new revenue because it has to preserve. But it doesn't know to go from 0 to without the facilitation of the connections of the family. Now, of course, probably there are some experiments where people try to go from 0 to, and that's probably happening all the time now. Now, if Vogue was the opening trine, so before Vogue, we would have the opening square. And the opening square, which is the same transit we have right now, would be at the 1516s. So it would be 1600s, 1568, 1570s. And this would be an opening square with Neptune in Gemini and Pluto in Pisces. By the way, we're going to have almost exactly the same aspect in the 2060s. Pluto will be going from, I think, from Taurus to Gemini. And Neptune, I'm sorry, will be going from, I think, the end of Gemini to Cancer. I will check this. 1568. So this was the nature of the opening square. So as far as Pluto and Neptune are concerned, we should be thinking about going from the opening sextile, which is where we are now, and that would be up until the 1540s, up until, and this would probably date back it dates back to 1536 would be the opening sextile. Pluto was in Aquarius, Neptune was in Aries. This is the time we are now. So we need to think 1536, 1530s, 1530s, 1540s, and then we move to the opening square at the 2060s. So if we're thinking old money family that is only a century, I want you to take your lineage back to 1536, and I want you to take your lineage back to 1540s. But what I don't want you to take your lineage back and stay there is the 1880s with the Gilded Age, where that was the conjunction. I want you to look at the Gilded Age. I want you to look at the conjunction. But I also want you to know that the Gilded Age, from where we are now, is a couple of centuries ahead. You definitely want to take that into consideration when you make a century-long plan, but you don't want to plan now for the Gilded Age. You don't want to discount the Gilded Age, but I don't want you to think in measures of the 1880s. And some of you that are a century long and considered old money, basically are very new money. You are Gilded Age babies in terms of the centuries, in terms of intergenerational wealth. And right now is very important because we are, how should I say it? Since the Gilded Age, we had two aspects. We had the conjunction and we had the opening sextile. I'm sorry, the closing sextile. The conjunction and the closing sextile. Sorry, the conjunction and the opening sextile. it's true. Sorry. Conjunction and the opening sextile. 1950s would be the perfection of the opening sextile, but that would build up at least 10, 15 years before that. So you're not closing a cycle to the Gilded Age. Gilded Age will not be here before several centuries. And in fact, if you built your wealth in 1904, you were building in between the fall of the Gilded Age to the 1950s. So what your lineage sustained is the move from the conjunction where it made its wealth to the opening sextile. And it held the opening sextile for a century because it knew how to hold a sextile of Pluto and Neptune. What it doesn't know how to hold is moving from the sextile to the square unless we're going to set intention and we're not going to use the Gilded Age alone as our comparative paradigm. Now let's take a look at the opening square. First of all, this was the closing square. Wait a second. This was basically the opening sextile that we see here. This is our times. In terms of Pluto Neptune, 1536, we have the opening sextile. Pluto, 7 degrees Aquarius. We have Pluto return to that point. And Neptune, 7-degree Aries. We're pretty much almost about the same. But with coming to the years where the sextile is beginning to dissolve. So we're going to have to look at 1536. I'm going to write it down. 1536. And think about the economies of Anne Boleyn. Execution of Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII marriage to Jane Seymour. So it's the time of Henry VIII. Dissolution of monasteries. English Reformation with dissolution of monasteries. Uprising known as Pilgrimage of Grace. So Age of the Pilgrims, alongside execution of reformer William Tyndale. So religious reformations, notable executions, the Year of Three Queens, the English Reformation, Pilgrimage of Grace, international events. William Tyndale, translator of the English Bible. And indeed, I can say people are rereading the Bible. So if I take a look at the early 1500s, it would probably be 16th century. Medieval period to the early modern era, defined by height of the European Renaissance, rapid spread of Protestant Reformation. I was predicting Protestants to be spreading again. But then we have to remember that this is only during the sextile. Neptune in Aries. Acceleration of global expeditions. This is expedition date. The sextile is still. Now, why is the square? Let's see what happens to us in the square. And this would probably be the 1540s, and then we had (1540s). Yes, 1540s would be the end of the sextile. 1568, so late 1600s. No. No. Okay. Okay, late 16th century. Yes. Transformative period marked by high renaissance, intense religious wars, global exploration. Now, Elizabeth I, English Renaissance, Spanish Armada, widespread use of firearms in European warfare. The crisis of faith. Conflicts and shifts and power shifts. Anglo-Spanish War. Um, 80 Years War. Spain and Portugal held significant colonial power in the Americas, through England and France, though England and France were beginning to challenge this dominance, and also Netherlands. Scientific advancements, scientific revolution, culture and arts, price revolution in the economy, driven by the influx of precious metals. Well, they should say opium wars. And England ruled during its golden age. Now, here's the thing. Golden age is not gilded age. Galileo Galilei began his pioneering contributions to physics and astronomy. Um, Shakespeare's literature. And where did we have Pluto and Neptune? Pluto was in Aquarius, Neptune was still in Aries in the sextile, but we're going to have Neptune in Gemini. I knew something with Gemini because Shakespeare used basically slang. Shakespeare, and then we think about the jargon of Shakespearean language being a lead language. One of the few things I remember from my English literature classes was that Shakespeare used slang. And Pluto, Pisces, we would have the Romantic era in music, I think, but we will also have something like that in the 70s. So 1770s, no? So this would be, wait a second. This would be the time of the Romantic era in music? Because we had the Romantic era in the aftermath of the Enlightenment, and that's too quick for me in the 15th. I need to, but here is the thing. This would be the opening square. And those are the times that we are venturing as of the 2060s. So I want us to think about the transition from the 1540s to the 1560s or to the 1570s. Age of discovery. Between the 15th century to the 17th century. Okay, but this is Wikipedia, but here, escalation, religious conflict escalation, escalation of the Reformation, and the expansion of European global empires. This era saw the height of the Counter-Reformation, the abdication of Charles V, and the onset of the 80 Years' War, marking a shift from imperial centralization to religious fracturing. It's the opening of the Age of Discovery, death of Michelangelo, 1564. In summary, the transition shifted European power from unified Habsburg ambition towards religiously divided nation states. We're gonna have to mark that again and again and again and again and again and again. Because it's the booming. Remember when I did the astrological considerations for declarations of independence? It's on Beechwood, Jupiter point of Thales, Sirius Thales moon, Rockefeller astrolix, Spirit of Matter on YouTube. This should be listened to like people read the Bible, because it's the basis of when we think about declarations of independence. Enough of declarations of independence putting we the people last in the equation. Um, and by the way, sidereal astrologers looked at declarations of independence and natal charts of countries. They saw also with the moon, also sidereally, was not well aspected in the sovereignty boom that we had in the age of Standard Oil, which is the Pluto-Neptune sextile. So many of you that have adapted to Standard Oil, and if I think about 1904, it can be around the going through the dissolution of Standard Oil and sustaining that. And that sustenance was assisting in surviving the sextile, the Pluto-Neptune sextile. It's kind of like if one went through the Bolshevik Revolution and the dissolution of Standard Oil into daughter companies and sustained, they had the sextile almost guaranteed, because it went from a hard aspect to an easy aspect. Now we're going from an easy to harmonious aspect, an agreement between Neptune and Pluto, to a disagreement. We're going to have nation states, intense competition for colonial expansion. But here is the drama. This age, while nation states were divided, there were expeditions, but as we come to the square, we begin to have the decolonization. Up until the 60s. Now, already in the 2030s, we see the dissolution of the bisextile. And the dissolution of the bisextile will build to an age of decolonization. Where the square is the competition between colonialistic empires. Because we have to think about, when we think about, let's say, decolonization. Era of decolonization. This was the forming of the closing sextile. So this is still the sextile that the old money families that built their wealth in the early 1900s, they sustained the age of decolonization. What do these families have to offer us? Knowing how to go through decolonization and sustaining wealth. What could this family be challenged by? The expeditions. Now, this age is also an expedition age. It's a minor expedition age. It's not the trine. After the square, we're going to have the trine. The trine will be the children's children. So here's the thing: families that are owed money and made their money during a trine, they are the most susceptible um, to, how should I say that? They are owed money for the centuries where it was a harmony between two other planets. Now, there can be a gruesome Uranus going through. They still had to sustain. Um, a Uranus square Pluto. Think about the Me Too. Uranus and Aries squaring Pluto. People that thought that the Me Too went too far, that it was just a phase, economically speaking, I would, um, the dismantling of colonial elements such as education, language, cultural practices, often paired with indigenization to restore native traditions. Again, all of this happening within the sextile. So, what century-old money has to say to us? We sustained the spring of nations. We sustained decolonization. What they don't have to say to us is going from the hard aspect, which was back then the oil company dissolution, to the easy aspect is not going from the easier aspect to the hard aspect. So if decolonization was the sextile, it was basically still within the opening sextile. So we had the Gilded Age and the decolonization that came with the opening sextile. Now we move into a hard aspect that in its angle, which means the last opening square we saw in 1560s, between faith and heresy, Michelangelo in the 1940s coming from the opening sextile to the square, and Calvinism spread rapidly from the 1550s to the 1560s, and 1568 we had the 80 Years' War starting, which was the mark of the square. Which means let's take a look at this 80 Years' War, because that's what we're expected of something that has a timeline of that in the 2060s. Prince flag. The orange, white, blue flag was first mentioned by the town of Brill, and this was liberated. Red, white, blue flag was first mentioned in 1596. So 1572, orange, white, blue flag, and then we have 1596, red, white, blue flag. This would probably be Netherlands. As a result of the war, marriages and political maneuvering, most of the region currently known as Belgium and the Netherlands were in hands of Dukes of Burgundy, Charles V, and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, this is where we see the topic of Catholicism and Protestants. And those were 1550s. The rulers were still, as I see here, Catholic. at least as for Holy Roman Emperor. By mid-16th century, the Habsburg controlled the Netherlands, comprised of 3 million people, 300 cities, and 17 provinces. The southern three Walloon-speaking and the northern 14-speaking Dutch. The representative assembly for the Netherlands was the States General, called into being by Philip the Good, 1464. Antwerp was one of the economic centers of Europe and the place from which the gold bullion coming from the New World was exchanged. The Habsburg Valois wars with France ended in 1559 with the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis, making the movement of people and ideas easier in Western Europe. One of the eyes on the move was the Calvinist Protestantism out of Geneva. Um, it found particular support from the numerous lower class, lesser noble, and townsfolk in the Netherlands. So this was more of a populist. So Protestant religion was associated, as I see from here, with the people. Some of the events of the French war now this means what? Class wars. Some of the events of the French wars of religion, 30 years of war, War of Three Kingdoms, are included, as they had considerable bearing on the events occurring during the 18 Years' War. So we have the 1550s, Antwerp becomes center of Lutheran Protestantism. 1522, again, this whole happens throughout the sextile and the transition to the square. We're still going to see with Neptune Aries a widespread of Protestant religion or something like Protestant religion, according to my prediction. 1522, the spread of Lutheran Protestantism in Netherlands leads to the establishment of an Inquisition. These folks were evil as well. Or they brought the Inquisition because the Inquisition wanted to subdue them, I guess. To enter the houses and to examine the abundance of the furniture and all kinds of utensils, all equally neat and well kept, causes great pleasure and even greater astonishment, for indeed there is not perhaps in the whole world anything like it. Luigi Guicciardini on Homes in the Netherlands, 1540s. Okay, now we have to think about when were the Templars trying to Templars charging monarchy for debt, because these cycles are really important. Knight Templars, evolving in 14th century, had substantial debt over several monarchies. King Philip IV of France, financial entanglement, and so on and so forth, led to the Templars' immense wealth, independent status, and the end of the Crusades, led directly to their violent suppression orchestrated by Philip IV to eliminate his debt and seize their assets. Massive debt. King Philip IV of France was deeply indebted to the Templars, so the debt pressure 1291, 1307. I'm gonna have to check that with the Neptune Pluto, because I think we're heading towards another one. Think about the 1700s. Think about the French Revolution times. Was another time where there was attempt to charge the monarchies for debt. But this was during the trine between Pluto and Neptune. So now we are sort of heading towards another one, but with moving from the sextile to the square. Now, within the sextile, there are talks about, let's say, Bibi's wife as Marie Antoinette. Um, Back to our history, increase 1540s to 1550s. That's the transition from the opening sextile to the opening square. Increase in Anabaptist Protestantism in the Netherlands. Anabaptist Protestantism. 1550s, 1560, increase in Calvinist Protestantism in the Netherlands. And 1550s, Edict of Blood established death penalty for Protestant heresies. So 1555, Emperor Charles V, Burgundian who spoke Flemish, abdicated and the Habsburg Empire is divided, with Spain and Netherlands passing to Charles' son Philip II. The Spaniards seem wise and madmen. The French seems madmen and are wise. The Spaniards seems wise and are madmen. The French seems madmen and are wise. 1555. Okay, the changing of the county landlords, pretty much. 1557 June. 8,000 English soldiers land at Calais, France, to join Habsburg forces against France. And then 1558, William of Orange persuades the States General to grant Philip II a 9-year subsidy in exchange for granting liberties and removal of 30,000 Spanish mercenaries. So whenever we think about criticizing Dutch East India, we need to think about Protestantism being a minority in the face of a Catholic Inquisition. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, when we speak about Dutch colonialism being one of the most cruel, first of all, the Protestants have less advocacy and their crimes were more documented. Secondly, they were running away from the Inquisition. So it's not impossible some of their methods were things that they learned from the Catholics. And it's a good thing to remember when we want to prevent Inquisition and prevent the atrocities to do with colonialism. Reorganization of bishoprics in the Netherlands and centralization of their control. Granville appointed the primate of the Church of the Netherlands. (1561) Royal Edict authorizes imprisonment and confiscation of property. Indeed, 2060s, the word confiscation of property. Now, we also had confiscation of property during the communist regime, which only fell at the 1990s. And this is confiscation of property of all who attended the Huguenot public or private worship service. And this was where the Catholics attacked the Huguenots. beginning of the new influx of refugees to Kent from Low Countries. Now, another thing to remember is how the Christians took over the Ottomans. And the fact that, when I was traveling with my mom around, I think, 2007 in Europe, we were laughing because there were so many Turks. I cannot imagine Germany without kebabs. And one of my jokes was that Europe had to conquer itself from the Ottoman Empire, and we might have to do it again. Now, I think Turkey is in NATO. Um, and which tells us that if we are building on, let's say, Catholicism to be eradicated, then we should learn from the Protestants and the Huguenots what because they suffered the Inquisition. And let's take a look at the end of the Inquisition. Dragon Age. This one refers to the Spanish Inquisition, which will be abolished in the 1834. 1834, final abolition would be 1834. And this would be by the secular um, now, how do you hack that century-long system? One way and one way only. Zero rape, zero slavery, zero ritual abuse. Namely, the type of esoterics that relies on harvesting the energy. That's the thing that sets people as competitors to the Roman Empire. And one cannot compete with that. This was why Vogue was a bubble that popped, and United States was the continuation of Vogue by other means. Shout out to the meme that went on social media with the man holding the globe and the globe being the US dollar, and the man, but next to the man was written, well, nothing in particular. Don't rape children. Of course, Mars is in Aries, so it's way more simplistic than it is, but it still goes to that. So 1562, Huguenots massacred at the Sens. That would spark what people call the expeditions. Like what were the Golden Fleece supposed to do but flee that? The Golden Fleece, we're talking about Dutch East India. Huguenot and town of Rennes besieged by Catholic forces. Townspeople